by the flood. You know that story. But where sin abounded, grace found a way. God was able to keep a remnant of 8 people, Noah and his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives. And that was how, after the whole of the days of the flood, about 100 and something days or more, then the Bible told us Noah landed on Ararat. And on Ararat, he now took an animal and offered to God. And immediately, God said something. Then God, in chapter 9, verse 1, he said, then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth. Does that sound familiar? Very familiar. That was the first Great Commission. God was just re-emphasizing it, that I've not changed my plan. Even though you have no capacities to spread righteousness now, like I planned, but you have the capacity to spread. So keep spreading. Don't worry about sin. I will catch sin up later. Just you spread. I'm not looking for anything. Do you see the scattering process that is inside that first Great Commission? It is there. Fill the earth. And filling the earth means spread all over the earth's surface. Is there anything complicated in obeying this instruction? It's not complicated. It's clear. Anybody that understands grammar will understand this. Fill the earth. Move around the earth. Make sure you take over the earth for me. Now, so many times people, when I say this, people will say, no, God said something in chapter 8 towards the end. But brethren, what God said, this was the first audible instruction. The one that God said in chapter 8 towards the end, and was saying, well, as long as this thing, seed time and harvest will not cease, I will not destroy the earth by water again. Look at my rainbow. He did not say that audibly. The Bible said God said in his heart. But somehow the revelation came to men. But the first audible thing God will say is this, that he blessed Noah and told them exactly the first commission, that first Great Commission. He never changed it. Now, the next generation came out and disobeyed this simple instruction. They came out and said, look, why should we just be doing all this? In verse 3 to 4 of chapter 11 of Genesis. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the earth's surface. Now, they were not ready to obey God's command to fill the earth for him. They decided that, look, we want to stay together in one spot at Babel. Why do they want to stay together in one spot? And you will know, you will understand who is behind this. There's a man who disobeyed in heaven. There was a being that disobeyed in heaven, the devil, where everybody forgot the devil because God sent him packing from the Garden of Eden before he sent man packing. So people forgot, but he was waiting for them at the gate. He knew God would send them out. There was no other way. The righteous God will not condone all those things. So he was waiting for them. The moment they came out, he began to gather them, he and his demons. They began to shepherd them. And they made them to come to this conclusion: don't mind God. Look at the so that we may make a name for ourselves. You see what made God, chuck the devil out from heaven. Let's make a name for ourselves so that we will not be scattered over the surface of the earth, which is the direct disobedience to God's command to fill his earth. Now, God had to judge them because nothing can spoil that plan. This issue of spreading all over the earth's surface, it cannot be compromised. God doesn't compromise scattering. The moment you tamper with scattering, honestly, judgment comes. Now, he got to that point. The Bible told us in Genesis 11, 5 to 9, he said, come, let us go down. This is God talking, the Godhead. He said, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth's surface. And they stopped building the city. That is why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the surface of the earth. Now, what are we talking about? Now, look at this. It's, you see, when you think about it, it seemed as if they got to a point where they maybe, let me just give you my imagination of it. They were building, maybe they got to a point and said, this night, let's go and sleep. Tomorrow we'll come out and walk at, this is becoming difficult. This height where we have built this tower, to continue, let's go and think over it. Tomorrow we will do something. And overnight, the Holy Ghost passed through that camp and distributed the gift of tongue and interpretation of tongues. They were the first recipients. And the moment they got it, they didn't even know they got that gift. Everybody woke up in their homes. Husband told the wife, because God will not create confusion in homes. Husband told wife, please put water in the bathroom. I want to bath so that I can get to the side. The wife complied because they understood one another's language. Children understood the earth, they got to the side. That was when confusion started. Foreman said, bring me sand. That one said, Kilowi. Did you drink? I was telling you not to drink yesterday. Okay, don't mind this, James. Mary, please bring me sand. He said, Ogini. He sampled so many people and different languages from about 20 people, and everything was scattering. And then they began to go from, everybody was just wondering what's wrong with us. And every man, you understand, when you have that kind of situation, everybody will gather their family. I don't want to lose anybody. And then when they meet somebody speaking their kind of language, they say, thank God, come, let's move here. Before they knew what was happening, people that were together last night became separated from one another. And some languages are very harsh. One of them may be trying to say, my friend, but I ate in your house yesterday. Why can't you understand me? And he said, he said, look. And then they ran. Everybody started now, people that they were friends together, they began to separate. And that was how God scattered them all over the earth's surface. Brethren, the first Great Commission was finally enforced. It had to be enforced because it is key to God's plan. It is key to the gathering that he plans for at the end of the day. If there's no scattering, there will never be a gathering. That's what we saw in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Without a scattering, there will never be a gathering. And God, it does not bother God, even if it seems as some things will step down. But first and foremost, he must achieve his purpose. Now, in doing that, an issue, linguistic and cultural distances were created in the human plane. You know, rather than, you see, imagine Jesus coming into a world of homogeneous language and culture. That was what the Greek culture did for Jesus. Everybody understood Greek in that world. But imagine the whole world today can speak the same language. This gospel, in fact, we will have been latecomers to the Great Commission. But God does not, it does not bother God. What the difficulty, we are the ones that look at difficulty. He doesn't see it as difficulty. And for the man who is ready to bow to God's will and to allow God to do his will in their lives, forget it. Those things that people are looking at as problems, they are no problems to God. He will do his will and sort them out. Now, what are we talking about? This issue of scattering rather than gathering was so important to God that he was not bothered to create what looked like a bigger problem, because this looked like a bigger problem to me. When nobody can understand, how do you now pass whatever message you want to pass? Everybody became enemies because as people moved on, it was the first thing was linguistic, language change. But as people began to move from one another, physical distance, some people crossed over. It seemed as if I wish I had enough time. I would have prove to you that it seemed as geography taught me, that God pulled away the earth when he was sure everybody was on different parts where they needed to be, and then there was this permanent separation. Some people found themselves in cold areas, some in hot areas, and then they developed cultural traits that fitted the context where they found themselves. And so those distances continue to grow, and they were created in the human plane. Now, the greatest downside is not even this. All these ones are small. But the greatest downside is still this issue from Garden of Eden. Man scattered with sin. So something has to be done with that one for God's original purpose to be accomplished. And that's where God is going. Now, let me quickly do something before we go, because this is a very, very ripe time to be able to define what they call people group or nation. A people group with their language, a people group are a people that are delineated, separate from other people with their own language and culture. Sometimes they live within, in fact, most of the time they live within the same areas, and sometimes have similar occupation. Once you see a people like that have the same language, the same culture, and they live within the same areas, and sometimes they have similar cultures, such people groups are called people groups or nation. Like Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, Tiv, Edo, Ijaw, British, German, Irish, Scots, Welsh, Arab, Punjabi, Zulu, any type of, once it's a tribal group, that is what we call people group or nation. People delineated after Babel. So anytime you read in the Bible and you read nation, please don't look at it as a country. It is the people group that are separated by a language. You see, this is totally different from this geopolitical nation, countries like UK, Botswana, Nigeria. Now, in Nigeria, we have 423 different ethnic groups, this people group or nation. And yet somebody came and called Nigeria one nation. It's not one nation. It's 423 nations. It's one country. Yes, let's use the right thing. Country, but not nation. When God says nation in the Bible, please put on a different cap from today that is talking about a people group that speak the same language, have the same culture, many times live within the same area, and sometimes have the same occupation. Now, despite this great problem of distances that led to the division, making the reaching out to the peoples of the world more difficult. Like I said earlier, that's not the most difficult. The most difficult is this issue that man scattered with sin. And I think that's where I will stop for now. Man scattered with sin. That is the greatest downside. These other ones, honestly, they are not anything to God. But that man scattered with sin, what do we do with sin? Thank you, my sister Ibota.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that detailed, that in-depth teaching from where it all started from, and for that light on dominion and what exactly we should be doing. So you mentioned earlier, sir, you mentioned that when sin came in, glory became darkness. So there was that entrance of sin. So my first question will be now that how does God deal with the sin problem that man had to scatter with? How do we look at that, sir?
Okay. Now, dealing with the sin issue was another issue on its own. God needed to deal with that, because if God did not deal with that, then what he was looking for, righteousness, spread all over the earth's surface, will not be a reality. So sin had to be dealt with. And we saw God beginning to deal with the sin issue from Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. So all he did was that he knew that to solve the sin issue, he needed to become the salvation of man to the ends of the earth. No man can do it because we were all riddled with sin. But God had to come, break into man's plane, and be able to do this work as he promised in Genesis 3:15. Now, if it was you or me, I know if we look at all the people groups that are there, we will want to just be able to say, okay, let's make one man in every people group to be able to get everybody. But God, he knew the problem of man. This man, there's a big problem with him. Look at the problem he had with even Abraham, one man that he picked. Imagine having to deal with thousands of Abraham. It will have been a big problem. So God's strategy was, I'm looking for just one man. And many times, that is always what God does. He will tell you, I'm looking for a man. God called a man, and that man was Abraham, and gave him blessings beyond his dreams. Blessings beyond every man that was living in his time. And promised him, I'm going to bless you beyond, and even your descendants, beyond any man in their own time. What did he say? Along with the blessings came, but along with the blessings, he said, maybe let me read the blessing. Genesis 12, 1 to 3, he said, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. I will curse, and peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so the second part of this was the responsibility. There was a blessing because God knew that Abraham cannot carry out that responsibility was going to give him without first giving him the blessing to carry it out. You remember I was talking about dominion the other time. That dominion is having everything you need under God to be able to fulfill a God-given vision, purpose. So God had to bless Abraham first before he began to give him responsibility. And when you look at the Great Commission, anywhere you look, the blessing comes always before the responsibility. So along with the blessing, now came the responsibility to be God's blessing to all the nations of the earth. Now, the first Great Commission was the one God gave to Adam, which he reiterated again when he was talking to Noah. Now, this was the second Great Commission that he gave to Abraham. And the responsibility was that Abraham will now be the blessing to, the blessing of God domiciled in him. It will now be the blessing of God to every other nation of the earth. Look at what God did. Abraham, God said, I will make you a great nation. And yet, Babel crowd, all they were aspiring to get to was to just build one city. When you are talking about a nation has many cities. Look at the Yoruba nations. Can you count how many cities are there? Or the British nation, so many cities. Cities all over the place. So when the ultimate of the Babel crowd was this small, visions of man, visions that the devil can give is always too small. Look at what God was giving a man. And he's saying, I will make you. He didn't say you will do it. I will do it. Secondly, he said, I will make your name great. These ones were saying, let's make a name for ourselves. Thirdly, God says, I will make you a blessing to the nation. They said, we don't want to scatter. We will disobey God. So Abraham inherited the blessings, and many times, we acknowledge it. In fact, we acknowledge it with songs. Abraham's blessings are mine. Hallelujah. Abraham's blessings are mine. And we celebrate the blessings. But now, the task of Abraham, because the blessing was to perform a task, we dodge this one. Or at best, just tap it on the head here and there. Now, the mandate, the task was so clear. God said, I am scattering you, Abraham, and all your descendants, properties, etc., into regions where the need for the blessings that you are carrying are needed. His mandate was not a sedentary mandate. God was giving, he said, I will make you a blessing to the nations. The nations are all over the place. And brethren, anytime Abraham's descendants were not a blessing to the nations, they begin to now copy the nation's behavior. Because when you are not focused on what God has given you to do, it won't be long when the devil will tap into that your disobedience and my disobedience to introduce different things. And the moment this one begins and they are not becoming showpieces for God, then God will just say, okay, Assyrians, take the king, go and beat these people. And then they will carry them away into strange lands. And in the strange lands, the likes of Daniel, the likes of different people will begin to rise up to showcase God. The kings will say, anybody that worships anybody that is not the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I mean, he will be in trouble. They showcased God. So that was the task that God gave to them. Now, Abraham's descendants at the end of the Old Testament could hardly stand in the covenant, talk less of being a blessing to the nations. In fact, at the end of towards the end of Malachi, they hated the Gentiles because the Gentiles became God's whip to whip them. So they hated the Gentiles. They didn't even want to have anything. Gentiles could not enter the temple. They made sure animals were being sold in the Gentiles' court. They prefer animals to be there than for Gentiles to be there. It was terrible. So to be a blessing to the nation, you need to first stand in the blessing yourself. A man that is not standing on solid ground cannot pull a man that is sinking in a quicksand. If he stands in the quicksand, both of them will go down. You need to stand on solid ground first before you can bring somebody out. So has Abraham's task finished? No. Now, at the end of the Old Testament, Abraham had an unfinished task. But thank God that the only thing, the major achievement that they prepared was that they prepared a landing site for that salvation of men to the ends of the earth, the nation of Israel. I wish I had time to paint that picture, but because God walked through quite a number of things to be able to get there. But what we are saying is that they did something, and the greatest of the things they did was they had a landing site, a plan for redemption, a plan to go and take people that are in captivity is as good as the landing site. If the landing site is compromised, forget it. America, when they were going to take Osama, the landing site was the thing that made it possible. If the landing site is compromised, forget it, the plan is compromised. The enemy will catch you there and your plan is gone. So they provided the landing site, the nation Israel, where Jesus, the salvation of men to the ends of the earth, could land. So Jesus, as promised, the pinnacle of the Abrahamic blessing, came. He came to fulfill the purpose of becoming the salvation of men to the ends of the earth. And he did this by his death. By his death, he atoned for our sins. It was God's sacrifice for sin. By his resurrection, by his burial, he took sin to a place where it was buried forever. And by his resurrection, Jesus brought forth the power to be able to live a new life, void of offense. Now, this salvation of all men to the ends of the earth was packaged as the gospel. So you can see, God had now prepared, number one, he scattered men all over the earth's surface. They've gone. Now, the second level, he began. And that second level took a long time. But eventually, at the fullness of time, the carrier of the blessing, the salvation of all men to the ends of the earth, landed on earth. And he prepared the blessing for the sin of all the men that have scattered everywhere. He produced it. What could turn sinners to righteous saints? He produced it and packaged it as the gospel. Thank you very much.